Public Safety and Justice Affairs Committee meeting this Tuesday, October 5th, 2021. Roll call, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. First and foremost, I would like to remind everyone that in attendance that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the county YouTube page. Calling the roll, Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Ms. Conwell.
Present.
Mr. Tuma.
Here.
Mr. Jones.
Here.
Ms. Simon. Ms. Simon is absent at the moment. Also, let the record reflect that Councilman Miller is also in attendance.
Welcome,
You have a
Mr.
quorum.
Miller.
And you have a quorum.
Thank you, ma'am. Public comment?
No public comment has been submitted.
In your packets, the minutes of the September 21st meeting are attached. If they're in order, I'll accept the motion in a second.
So moved.
Second.
Motion in a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Against? Thank you. Resolution 2021-0224.
Resolution 2021-0224, authorizing contract number 1791 with Applewood Centers, Inc. in the amount not to exceed $926,647 for emergency respite and crisis bed services for youth referred by the Coordinated Approach to Misdemeanors, also known as the CALM program, for the period July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2022.
Sarah Baker with Juvenile Court. Sarah Baker with Juvenile Court. This is a new program that we have developed over at the court. So we are asking for approval for a contract with Applewood, and this will provide emergency respite and crisis bed services for youth that are coming through our CALM program or coming through Alternatives for Detention or our Early Intervention and Diversion Center. And I also brought with me our Director of Programming to kind of give you more details in regards to the actual program itself.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Bridget Gibbons. I'm the Director of Programming. So this program we struggled with the name, but we named it Daisy House simply because it's on Daisy Avenue. It is a way for us to meet a couple needs of the police officers, the community, and youth involved with juvenile justice system, and some of those youth that are dually involved with the juvenile justice system and child welfare. So essentially, this contract will allow the court to operate our early intervention and diversion center 24/7. We will have clinicians over at Daisy House available 24/7 to be responsive to police officers who arrest a youth that are in need of support. So right now, we already have our CALM, Project CALM is our domestic violence diversion for youth who are arrested for domestic violence but do not present as a significant safety issue. So those youth will be brought down to Daisy House and be allowed to be triaged there, which means these clinicians will meet with the youth. They'll see, are they medically cleared to be placed by the court either in a respite home, a secured bed, and then what we will have coming in a couple weeks, which is the youth care centers, which are group homes. It'll allow for a quicker response for police officers for youth in crisis that do not meet the criteria of our detention center. It'll help us to provide a much more trauma responsive placement in lieu of secure detention for youth that come to the attention of law enforcement that do not have an appropriate placement, but their offenses do rise to the level of needing arrest and moving out of, and need to be removed from the home. So we have, these clinicians will triage and meet police officers 24/7 at Daisy House. They'll begin the assessment, kind of identifying what their needs are. They have a couple screening instruments they'll run the youth through. Then they'll begin the process of identifying a placement or tagging in any partner that needs to be notified. Hey, you know, if it's a DCFS involved youth, they will coordinate contacting DCFS. And then from there, they'll help kind of identify which placement these youth would go to in lieu of secure detention. So the beauty of this program is it allows police officers to return quicker to the street to respond to higher community safety threats. It allows us to screen kids and get mental health services and family-centered treatment in place a lot faster. It also lets us arraign youth the following day who do have a pending delinquency offense so that we can get services in as quick as possible and bring together the partners that need to be brought together in order to slow reoffending behavior. And with this, there is one secured bed at Applewood Centers, so youth that are truly in a crisis that have significant mental health needs and meet criteria for that admission will be allowed to be quickly expedited to be placed in a secure bed. That'll allow DCFS or the court to have some planning time to arrange whether it's family therapy or getting the right services in place. So that'll be a safe place for kids in lieu of our secure detention center. So the goal is really to minimize kids with significant family or behavioral health issues from going into our detention center and really expedite the time police officers spend with youth arrest. So that's really, I guess, in a nutshell, what the program is. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Where's the money coming from?
So this is a reclaim-funded program from the state's reclaim.
Okay, and where's the location of this house?
It is at Daisy Avenue, which is at the Jones campus, 3518 West 25th. It's in the back. So they have a couple buildings over there. It's an actual house on Daisy Avenue.
Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Through the chair, a couple of my questions have been answered, but I want to delve a little bit into the DCFS. When in the past, when they've had issues with children that are under their care, but they don't quite fit that, whatever that criminal step is, the juvenile courts have turned them away. So you stated that we will have now one bed for that purpose. I was wondering, I know it doesn't happen all the time, but at a period a few months ago, there were more than one case at the same time. So my question to you would be, can we have more than one bed, and what or why was it determined that we would only have one?
That's a great question. So my answer is semi-complicated, so I'll just start with. So we do have one secure bed for kids that meet criteria for a secured residential bed. Then we have our calm respite beds, and those actually we do have right now, which is one bed for those domestic violence cases. The monkey wrench for those is that in order for us to place a youth in a therapeutic foster bed that are not already in the custody of DCFS, we have to have parents consent to participate in that in order for these agencies to accept these youth. So the ones that sometimes have been spilling over in DCFS are parents that flat out refuse to participate in Project Calm. So when we used to have an alternative to detention, and then we stopped sending cases there because they had some issues that needed to be addressed. So then the third part of that is we have what will be coming up in a couple weeks, what we're calling the youth care centers. So those will allow us to, and all of those, there are 3 different group homes that'll be coming soon that will be able to receive kids 24/7. So even if a parent says, I refuse to participate in Project Calm, we will have group care centers that all the parents have to do is sign a consent saying we allow the court to remove the child from the home, and then we will place them in these programs. So it will be, as of today, it's only one bed and one respite bed, but very soon, hopefully, it will be those youth care centers too, so we can adapt to the needs for those youth.
And just to follow up, Mr. Chair, okay, so the youth, coming soon, the youth group center, 24, when you say 24 hours, currently now we have a children's room. So if we're in between, a kid walks out, they pick them up, they spend a little time at DCFS downtown. So when you say 24 hours, with that, children could still walk away. Okay, so if it's an older teenager, they can still walk out even though we have security there. So I was just wondering, when you say 24 hours, will there be officers to detain them and not let them leave, or will it be an open door policy?
So in order for kids to come and be picked up by the police, brought down to Daisy to be triaged to go out to one of these youth care centers, there will have to be an arrest. So that's going to be a key. So we only have this for juvenile court, because it's juvenile court funded program. There has to be an arrest of those youth. So a law enforcement official will bring those youth down to Daisy. Daisy will work to call each of the youth care centers to make, and we have a process sort of worked out for that. Then one of the youth care centers will pick that youth up at any time or day to bring them back to their home, their group home. So that is one piece. We can't just pull kids out of the child care room to bring them over to this program. I still think this is a solution to part of the issue. I think we have, we're going to continue to have ongoing issues with kids that may not meet criteria, that we'll still have to work out with Division of Children and Family Services. We are in discussions with Division of Children and Family Services regarding these kids that are dually involved in both systems, but we believe that this program and the youth care centers will be a good alternative response that should lessen some of those issues.
Anything further? Looking at the dates, I would assume you want to get moving on this because it was July. Okay. If I don't have any concerns about moving it second reading, I'd accept the motion on Resolution 2021-0224 to the full council under second reading suspension.
So moved.
Second.
You have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We're going to move into our presentation period, Mr. Applebaum. As you are all aware, we've obviously been working on the new jail, working on a site right now, I believe, haven't been chosen yet. But there are some concerns on the council as far as updating and questions that we may have, various council members may have regarding the jail. Haven't seen, I don't think, some of the presentations, so this would be a good catch-up. Also brought to our attention recently has been some concerns from the judges regarding the Justice Center. If you could touch on where we're at with potential discussions on the Justice Center. I know the committee itself has not started those officially yet, but we do have concerns and questions regarding the Justice Center moving forward. Although we would like to focus obviously on the jail, that's our main concern right now, always has been. And until, in my opinion, we put shovel in ground, then we can seriously start talking about the Justice Center, whether or not to redo it, remove it, relocate it, who goes in there, what goes in there, size, and all the questions that we had originally started with the jail, we're now going to be dealing with down the road, the Justice Center itself. So, Mr. Applebaum, if you can update us on the jail and any concerns, questions, challenges, hurdles that you see with the Justice Center as we move forward.
I will. Hold on one second. You're up now? You can go ahead and put the screen up. I'm fine, Ellis. I just had a technical issue. Okay. Thank you. And if you cannot hear me clearly, I will remove my mask. So you just let me know. I know Mr. Gallagher wants my mask off, but I prefer when people can't actually see my face. So, fair enough. So I am going to go through a presentation here. Most of this, or a lot of this, is what we did at a steering committee meeting that took place on the 23rd. Some of this is a little new because I'm going to go a little bit into the court's discussion as Mr. Gallagher has asked me to. So I'm going to start out with a brief update. I'm going to talk about jail population and population management. I appreciate there was correspondence by both Councilman Miller and Councilwoman Conwell on this, and I think that you focused on some of the key concerns here, so we'll talk about that in this presentation. I'll talk a little bit about the background, the current population trends and their implications, and the method by which we're at least going to proceed right now. Then I'm going to talk just a little bit about a few new population management initiatives. We really have to drive that process. And then I'm going to talk about the return to the court's discussion, and that will be a steering committee meeting that we get back to in November. And you could obviously ask questions throughout, but we can also have questions at the end. So just in terms of the project status, just a quick update. So as you may recall, we have retained the services of a criteria architect to move us from programming into design. The first step, though, is confirming the program. We have a very detailed program that was prepared by DLR. There's been some things that have to be updated since that time. We have, for example, the sheriff is now on board, very active in how the sheriff's administration works with this. We have gone through 8 program confirmation meetings. Several in this room have attended those meetings. And we are about to, in about a week or two, we're going to come back with internally with the revised program. There have been modifications that have been suggested that do a lot of good for us. They consolidate aspects of the program and gain efficiencies. For example, the sheriff's administration, we did not know whether that would be a separate facility at the site or combined. We now know that that facility will be combined with the corrections facility, which means we can have spaces that are used for multiple purposes and will gain efficiencies. I will say at this point in time, though, that the 2 most critical variables on how we proceed are, number 1, the predicted jail population. And that's going to be the focus of my remarks for most of this session. And then the second thing is the ultimate site selected. Obviously, until we know the site, we can't design for the specific site. We also don't know how much time it's actually going to take to get the site under control. That is a variable, and the ultimate population is the other big variable. At this point in time in our process, however, we're moving forward to get our complete team on board. The other team member is the ultimate design builder. The selection process is underway for that design builder. We issued the RFQ on 9/21, had our pre-qualification conference on 9/30. We'll be getting RFQ responses on 10/21, and you can see the rest of the dates. The idea is to have the design builder on board so they can continue to look at the design that we're developing, provide cost estimates, and a series of pre-construction services leading up to ultimately, in about a year or a little less or more, depending on site selection, getting a guaranteed maximum price and moving forward with construction. So that's just a little bit about the background of where we are on the project.
Mr. Chairman? What I would like to do is hold questions till the end, but because I didn't say that, go ahead.
This is anyway just a process question, just wondering whether you're able to send us these slides.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I would have had them for you, but I was still discussing with Mr. Gallagher what I was going to present a couple hours ago. So I will give you these slides as soon as we're done.
Thank you, that's all.
Okay. Jail population and population management. I want to start with some historical background, and this is a slide I haven't actually presented before, but it's kind of interesting. This shows you the Cuyahoga County population, and over the last, ever since Jail 1 was constructed and planned. And it's interesting because the Cuyahoga County population was over 1.7 million when we planned, or someone planned Jail 1, which, at that time was a 956-bed jail. The population has declined, as everyone knows, over time. When Jail 2 was planned and under construction, another 480 beds at that time, the population at that point in time was between 1.4 and 1.5 million. Now we're down to a population of over 1.2 million. So we've had everyone knows we've had a fairly significant population decline over years. We also know that and there's been a blip, obviously, since COVID, but generally, crime has gone down, total crime has gone down, arrests have decreased. But the one thing we also know is the jail population has consistently increased over this same time frame. This is a pretty dramatic look at population, and then we're going to juxtapose that with jail population. So by the time the planning report was done in 2014, you'll recall there was a facilities assessment report in 2013 and a planning report in 2014. But at that point in time, that planning report, the planners at that time looked at the jail population trends, and this quote comes out of that report. It is anticipated that in 2014 through 2030, the annual population of the jail is projected to be between 2247 and 2528, 2,528. Now, it's interesting what that would have implied for the construction of a jail. As I think I've talked to you about in the past, when you look at jail population and plan a jail, you look at the normal operating capacity, but then you have to increase that for surges and for the rated capacity. And by the way, the formula is you take that number, you divide by 0.85, and that tells you what you have to build to. So just by way of example, if we had simply relied on what was in that 2014 report, that range would have been building a jail to hold between 2,644 and 2,974. A tremendous number, tremendous cost, tremendous operational cost, way, way larger than our current jail, and frankly, almost double what our current jail was really capable of doing properly. As you know, we have a rated capacity, but we stretch that capacity with the way that we have to operate that jail. So these are rather astounding numbers. When we retained the services of our programming team, and in particular, we had Karen Chen come in and do a lot of statistical analysis, which she does nationally. Curtis Pulitzer and others come in. They did a review of jail population, and they were looking at the 10 years before they got there. That's from 2009 to 2019. And they determined that during that period, there was a 15.5% increase in jail population that peaked in 2018, and we'll disregard that. But looking basically from where we were in 2009 to 2019, there was a general increase in population, as you can see there, but at the same time, general population was decreasing, crime was decreasing, arrests were decreasing, and the criminal caseload were all decreasing. So when Karen looked at this, what she also noticed was that there were traditional methods for managing jail population that had been used in many, many other areas that were not being fully utilized in Cuyahoga County. So what she did is she said, look, I can give you forecasts using traditional and well-accepted national criteria. I can give you a high growth forecast, a moderate growth forecast, and a low growth forecast. But any of those forecasts are going to have a very large jail because they're going to show growth, and they're going to get into not maybe as high as that number that I showed you a minute ago, but very high numbers. She said, however, that if you just employed some system change and did the things that many other jurisdictions have done, you can bring that growth down. So she also showed how a system change model would work. And she went through the different forecasts of capacity using these different assumptions. So in 2019, in September, there was acknowledgement by the steering committee at that time that these numbers could be brought down through system change, which included a number of ideas which frankly had not yet been employed and certainly had not been maximized. And you're familiar with many of these concepts. We've talked about them and you've talked about them in other committee meetings, but they include diversion, central booking, bail reform, pretrial screening and services for courts, having a jail expediter and jail coordinator, jail population committee. All of these techniques were looked at. They were studied in other jurisdictions. We know how successful they had been in other jurisdictions. The question for the committee at the time, though, was how much of a reduction could we get employing these techniques, and when would those changes be fully activated and show results? Efforts were commenced on a number of fronts, and the general thought was if we can get a head start on this, 2 years ago, that in about a 2-year period of time, we should see results. And quite honestly, the committee was asked, because they were the experts here, what they thought the reduction could be, 10, 15, 20%. They pretty much were convinced that we could get about a 20% reduction of what historically was happening. And by the way, and that's once again, the graphic of range of projections. The point that was made about this, how important is it to try to get the reduction or at least control growth? And of course, we all know about the human cost of trying to get people out of jail who shouldn't be there and shouldn't be lingering. But in terms of operational and construction cost, now these were based on the program and numbers we had at the time, and this is going to change based on the new program, but these are good indicator costs. Look at the bottom. I am going to pull my mask off with your permission because I'm having difficulty. But take a look at the numbers on the bottom. If we could just reduce by 25 beds what we ultimately build the jail to, 25 beds is about $5.8 million savings in project costs. Operating costs for 25 beds is about $1.12 million annually. And over the course of 30 years, 25 beds is about $33 million. So this really mounts up. And by the way, you can divide this. It's one thing to build the jail larger. You could build it larger. And then if these techniques work, you could then darken areas of it and maybe save some operational costs. But obviously that's not ideal. But it's certainly better than building it larger and letting the population grow and then having to service it. In any event, those are the numbers and the realities. So what that led to in September of 2019, it led to this determination by the steering committee that you see here. And I want to read the first paragraph because I want to point out something about it. At that time, with all the evidence, and there were multiple presentations, multiple investigations of what other jurisdictions had done, the steering committee determined that there are significant opportunities to reduce population in the jail through a systemic approach to jail population management and reforms consistent with our commitment to public safety. We therefore determined that planning should proceed based on an assumption of a rated capacity, thank you, for the jail of no less than 1,600 beds. Some have said that we were absolutely planning for 1,600 beds. That's not quite accurate. What we were planning for was no less than 1,600 beds. It could be more, but we wanted to keep it as low as possible, obviously. In a support core plan for no more than 2,400 beds, plan to allow adjustment upward or downward. So it's a 1,600 to 2,400 range, but certainly with the desire to keep it as low as possible and as close to 1,600. If you actually look at the program that came out of this, the DLR program, is a little higher than 1,600, even in what was budgeted. That program shows if you don't go to a lot of the double bunking alternatives, it's around 1,680. And if you used all the space that was built out and actually double bunked to the maximum that you could with the original program, it would get you up into the mid-18s. But that's not where we want to be. But that's what that does. But my point is, if you really thought you were always going to have 1,800, you would design it for more because you don't want to maximize the double bunking opportunity. In any event, that's where we were. And by the way, just keep in mind that a jail at 1,600 using that 0.85% factor, that implies that your normal population is going to be around 1,380. That's what that means. So where have we been since that? Well, what happened, of course, 6 months later, COVID hit, and you have some numbers here that don't really tell you very much because the 2,091 was the last number in 2019. We went down to an average population. We're down at 1,430, an average daily population in 2020. What did that mean with COVID? Because we know we reduced it. How much of that could be sustained, how much of that was situational. And then to date, now this was a couple months ago, but the average daily population for 2021 had gone up to an average of 1,503. But if you take a look at it month by month, and first of all, take a look at the chart on the right, the orange chart, you can see that it's actually grown month by month from 1,340 all the way up to 1,632 in August. And I just obtained the information in September. September is actually 1,646. So this number has continued to grow. The chart on the bottom left is actually the daily population in the month of September. if you want to take a look at that. And keep in mind, the daily population is in what's in Jail 1 and Jail 2. We still do have some occupants in Geauga and Lorraine for special reasons. But that whole population, if you look at the right hand, that averaged 1646. So the population since January has consistently grown month by month. The high point, as you can see, was right after the holiday. It went up to 1703 after the holiday. So, those are the kind of the sobering numbers we have to work with right now. So, where are we having success? And I know that the sheriff has addressed you in this committee. There has been success. There's been success, for example, with electronic monitoring, where you can see the total number of offenders who are now, not in the jail because there's been a use of electronic monitoring. That's been successful. There are things which are working and are successful, but what has not been, kicked in yet are things like diversion, the impact of central booking. We really haven't had impact from a jail expediter yet, or any of those steps, and for various reasons. The question, though, the question is, where will this number be in 6 months, 12 months? Because here's the real issue. Ultimately, we have to go to the state and have our design approved. We can look to the state and we can say, yeah, we know our numbers are 1,600 or 1,700, but all these things are going to happen and maybe a year or 2 years down the line, and we're going to be down. So let's build to that lower number. Well, the state, and they would not be wrong in doing this, they're going to say, sorry, but we cannot approve that design. We have to look at what you've proven, what your trends are, and we can't risk your building a jail that is too small simply based on what you think might happen in the future. And that's a sobering reality. Now, I think we're going to get some flexibility, but we really, really have to take steps to do everything we possibly can, even in the short term, to drive this number down, because the trend and the number is very, very important. If the decision was based on today's numbers and nothing else, and I did this, this is actually pretty close. When I did this a few weeks ago, we assumed a current population of 1,650, which is close to where we are right now. Once again, you use your 0.85 factor, that would tell you that you have to build a jail with a rated capacity of 1941, which is larger than the jail that we're currently planning for. Now, we are going to take steps to figure out if we have to do that, how we can efficiently do it, within a design, but that's the reality. But this reality, it doesn't include two things. On the negative side, it doesn't account for the negative impact of elimination of COVID restrictions. Right now, there are misdemeanors that are not ending up in our jail that at some point in time likely can or will end up in the jail. Now, we're hoping that some of the steps we take, diversion, et cetera, can mitigate that, but that's a factor that's actually going to increase this number. It also doesn't account, obviously, for diversion and any other positive factors that could kick in. But that's a sobering look at where this number is and where it may be. So at this point, what do we have to do about it from a design point of view? Number one, we're designing with the flexibility to expand and include more than the minimum 1,600 or so, 1,680 beds in the base design. We're going to proceed with a flexible scenario, and we've asked the designers to proceed with flexibility with a couple of checkpoints, for looking at designing to these checkpoints, pricing these checkpoints, and you can see what they are right now. There's no real magic to these numbers other than some estimates based on what scenarios could be. In every case, the Corps will accept up to 2,400, but this is about the number of housing units we build out from day one. And you can see the base case at 1,600. You can see checkpoint number one, which would say that we're averaging around 1,618, but we have to build out to 1,904. And you can see checkpoint number two, we're averaging more like 1,800, and we're going to have to build out to 2,120. It's something we really hope we absolutely must avoid. My point is, we probably have to make a decision about the base case. If we're going to keep the present schedule that we have, which is pretty aggressive, and I will tell you right now, the aggressive schedule we're not going to maintain the aggressive schedule if we can't, if we don't have a successful or prompt property acquisition process. That is a wild card. But putting that aside, to maintain the base case right now, we really have to get close to making this decision as to what the base case is at the end of the year. And we're going to have to use our judgment. But I will tell you, and we can adjust it as we go on in design, but while we must plan for the, what I call the reasonable worst case, because we cannot build an undersized jail, but the benefits of continuing to press for immediate and continuous jail population reduction just can't be overstated. Every person we can get out of that jail, every person we don't have to build that jail for has, putting aside all the human benefits, and all the social benefits of that, the pure economic benefits are dramatic. And I'm just going to keep emphasizing this. So now, in terms of jail population management initiatives, and we're not going to go through presentation series, you may recall this list these are the basic things that were presented by our consultants that are used successfully in other jurisdictions, and that we have various initiatives that we've talked about. The number 2, diversion, you've heard a lot about diversion. Number 3, central booking, you know about interim central booking. About bail reform. I want to come back to number 1, though, because one of the things that we talked about was having a comprehensive and integrated criminal justice information system and a jail management program that involved having a jail population management committee, having a jail coordinator, a jail expediter, and really having people who are continuously working on this problem, looking at statistics, having someone who's a jail manager who gets in the face of any person who is not pushing as hard as they can, and we talked about this whole methodology. I want to talk a little bit about how that's been advanced, because I actually think Councilman Miller, you were the one who several weeks ago asked a question about where is this committee and what's happening with it. So first of all, let me talk about the positions. There have been 2 positions now that are being advertised by the county, and if you have specific questions about this, Bob Corey is here, I think, behind that post there, and he can answer some of these. But basically what happened was the jail expediter / coordinator position, it was determined that that really is 2 positions. One person who is really the data miner, who really gets in, looks at the data, and really analyzes it, and has numbers that are numbers that are available for everyone to use in the system. And the second is the jail population manager, the person who really, takes a hold of this information, meets with everybody involved in the process, meets with the prosecutor, talks to the judges, talks to everybody who has a say in the ability maybe to manage the system. My understanding is both of these positions have been advertised. There's a process for selection. The jail population manager will report directly to the chief of staff. The senior business intelligence analyst will report, is in the sheriff's department. But these 2 positions are very critical to get on board and working. In terms of the Jail Population Management Committee, what you see here on the left is that's the actual determination that the steering committee came to back in September of 19. And it said that a Jail Population Management Committee representative of all stakeholders should be appointed by representatives of the steering committee to begin the process of developing a comprehensive and integrated approach to jail population management, including development of criminal justice information system that will provide data on key management indicators for informed decision-making and allow monitoring over the multi-year period of jail renovation and/or construction and beyond. So has this committee been formed? Well, what actually happened on this is after COVID, which of course threw a wrench into all of this, Judge Sheehan, I believe, started to commence a Monday morning or a Monday afternoon meeting, and that was all about getting everybody out of the jail for COVID. That's when the population dropped down below 1,000. And it was attended by several in this room or their predecessors, the sheriff, our jail administrator, Bob Corey, chief of public safety, the public prosecutor, the county prosecutor, the public defender, other members of their staffs attended this meeting. That meeting serves part of this function, but not the entire function. So at the last steering committee meeting, it was determined that this committee would be formalized into the full function of what this jail population management committee was intended to be. Among other things, there will be a county representative that now attends the meeting. The city prosecutor has asked, and the city prosecutor will attend this meeting. And they will work with the jail population manager and the data analyst. So those staff people will be working with the committee to present information. And frankly, the jail population manager can then take a proactive role in working with those parties who, need to shore up what they're doing to do their part to get this done. And we're going to formalize that structure in a determination before the steering committee. That was agreed to at the last steering committee meeting. So that's a little bit on what's happening. I'm not going to go through central booking. As you know, that's moving forward. I'm not going to go through diversion. But that's just a little bit of what's new about population management. But my point is going to be, we have to drive and drive and drive this process. We cannot let our foot off the accelerator, because every person, any sustainable reduction in jail population in that jail will make a huge difference on how we move forward. So I'm going to, let me just ask, before I go to the courts,
Yeah.
Okay.
And could you just give the committee a look at, when we say we're going to build no less than 1,600 to 2,400, say we go to the state, and the state determines, no, you're going to build 1,700. But we get to 1,700, we built it. What does it look like if we have to expand that?
Okay, that's a very good
How quickly
question.
can we?
Yeah, so keep in mind that the key to this whole process is that there's flexibility. So whatever number we're going to build to, we're going to design to be able to expand it further. We may not build it out on day one, but we're going to design it so we can build out. So if, let's assume that we start out in year one and we have a number, whatever it is, 1,700, 1,800, and let's assume that 2 years from now, we just can't get a hold of population growth and we have to add another 100 housing units. The design that we come up with will have designed, basically think about it modularly, how you would increase or expand it. And there's two ways this can be done. I'll just tell you that one way you can think about it, you can think about it like as a core or spoke, a hub and spoke. And you can think about having a spoke where there's additional modular units. That's one method. Another method that we may be using is more of a core and shell concept, where the shell is actually there for a 2,400 person jail, but we don't build out within the shell. We're going to find out what's the most efficient and effective, because you could do it either way, and it may be that we actually build the larger shell, but don't build out the housing units within the shell. That's what but no matter how we do it, we're going to have flexibility. The issue though is that, it's unfortunate if you start out with the biggest possible jail and then reduce the size. It's much easier, less, or not easier, it's much less expensive if you don't have to start out with the maximum shell. But we'll have to see where we are. But it will be flexible both ways. But we want to hit the first number right, and we want to hit the first number with the lowest sustainable population that we can.
Questions? Mr. Miller.
Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Applebaum, and to my colleagues, first I'd like to thank you for all the work you've done and for your leadership on the importance of population management to this whole process. And I would just note by way of context that between 1970 and 2010 that the jail population in the United States of America quadrupled, and it did not make us any safer. And it's one of the worst things that we're doing in terms of equity. It flies totally counter to our recognition of racism as a public health crisis. So it's just very important that we we think about this strategically and measure the importance of it. I have just a couple of specific questions. The first one is regarding these checkpoints that you referred to. Do we have to build at one of the checkpoints, or if it turns out that we could build 1765 with an implied population of 1,500, can we do that even though it's in between a checkpoint?
The answer is we can pick an in-between point. This is just for the purpose of an initial analysis. What we have to build out, so what's different about Ohio, this is kind of interesting. If you look at Jail 1, as you know, one of the problems with Jail 1 is those pods were like, 24 to 26 cells. One of the things that we're going to do here is we're going to build out the maximum pods permitted by the state of Ohio, which is 48. So you can have 48 cells under direct supervision, and that's the maximum you can build out under Ohio law. By the way, Ohio law is very restrictive. Most other states you can build larger and be more efficient. Ohio, for whatever reason, is at 48. So the issue is going to be, we can pick different numbers, but in all likelihood, it's going to be in segments of 48. So, we're going to have a base case, and then you're going to be able to add 48 plus 48 plus 48 or minus 48. That's the way it's going to primarily look.
Okay. Second question is I'd like to compare two scenarios. The first one being that you start at 1,600 and you later add 248s, almost 100 for 96 more. And the second scenario is that you build 1696 right from the start. And my question is, does it cost you more money to build the 96 later as opposed to from the start, and if so, by how much?
The answer is it will cost more money later. Anytime you do, even if you plan it, anytime you do something later, either by change order or by another contract, it's likely to cost you more. So I can't, I don't have a judgment right now on by how much, because it kind of depends on whether we do the core and shell or not. I can say this much to you though. If we do core and shell, so that we're only building out interior work and we're not, like building new walls as a unit, that'll be less. Ellis, do you have a view on this question? This is, by the way, I think you've met Ellis Katz before. Ellis was works with PMC. He was my owner's rep project manager on the hotel project, as you may recall. He's an architect and has a lot of knowledge on these systems.
I don't have any specific numbers addressing your question, but I think from a percentage perspective, I would think it would be probably 25% more to have to build the walls and everything else that you would have to do versus just doing the interior fit out of a shell and core, as Jeff described.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, the bottom line, though, is anytime you do anything by change order as opposed to base building, it'd be one thing during our design process to increase and toward the end of design while our builder is still on board to build out more. But if we actually finish the project demobilized, even though we have the design ready, if then you have to go back out, and keep in mind, under the county's process, you would have to get new proposals, new bids or proposals. That is going to, that would increase it, especially if it was only for 48, let's say. So you want to be as close as you can on day one, even though you would have the ability to expand.
Final question is not to Mr. Applebaum, but it's to the administration, whoever can respond to it, and and I'm not looking for an answer today. My question is that I would like to get a statistical breakdown of the jail population in terms of what charges the inmates are charged with. How many murders, how many aggravated assault, how many manslaughters, and so on and so forth down the line. I've heard talk that 85% of the population is either murder or aggravated assault, and I find it hard to believe that number is that high, and I would like to see the actual statistics. If the statistics are that high, it constrains what we can do on population management. If the statistics are not that high, well, then maybe we can do more than we think we can. So I'd like to have those numbers put together and sent to us.
To Councilman Miller, through the chair, thank you. I've heard your request, and we will be compiling those numbers for you, but as a point of clarification, I'm going to use general numbers here because the numbers fluctuate over time. But I think the percentage that you're talking about, that 75 to 80% of people who are unclassified, high felonies or aggravated felonies of the first and second degree, those would be the people who we probably couldn't do anything with regards to releasing them. That percentage is not the percentage of the total jail population, but the percentage of the inmates who are awaiting trial with the court. So if I roughly have 1,650 inmates today, of those 1,650, 1,250 are there because they're awaiting trial. And it would be 85% of those 1,250 that are the type of inmates that are at that high of a level. We also have a contingent of inmate population that varies between 300 and 400 on any given day, which are very short-term inmates that roll over very consistently. And those are people who are awaiting transport, people who will be sentenced to other places, people who are waiting for a diversion home or a diversion bed, alternative sentencing things. And that 300 or 400 plus the 1,200 that we have pretrial would equal the total population of the jail. So when you talk about 75 to 80% of the people at that high of a level, that would be 75 to 80% of the pretrial detainees, not necessarily the entire jail population. We can get the statistics for you.
Okay, that's a good overview orientation for starters, and I would like to see the specific numbers. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Through the chair, one quick question to Mr. Applebaum. The additional shell that you described that may be utilized or not, how does that relate to the space that might be possible for the possible building of the future court offices?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Okay, so you talked about the additional shell that may or may not be built. How does that relate to the space for the possible building of future court offices?
Court?
Well, we talked about the judges coming over and utilizing, and that's not clear or defined yet. So when you're talking about building out additional shell, possibly for more beds.
The only reference I'm making on the shell just has to do with housing units.
Okay.
I'm not talking about what's in the core. Think about it this way. You have core functions. And that will be, all the core functions will be built so as to support 2,400. And by the way, if you have, if you have rooms there, where people meet there, how you accommodate pretrial conferences or anything like that, that's all going to be part of the base program anyway. When I talk about the shell, core and shell, I'm talking about the variable thing, which is housing units. So think about it this way. You can build the exterior walls of the jail, and you can build the structure, floor, exterior walls of the jail and everything about that jail so that it can include within its walls housing units to house up to 2,400. You may not build out the housing units. Think about like you have think as though you have a hotel and you have floors of the hotel that are built out, but you don't build the rooms out yet, which is where a big cost. That's what we're talking about in building out the core and shell.
I get it with the shell. What I'm referring to is, and I don't know if this has been determined or not, but I thought that we're going to build a jail, but we haven't determined if we're going to move the courts there and
Oh,
build
I'm
for the
sorry.
courts as well.
Oh, no.
So if, I know that hasn't been determined.
It
So
has
I'm
been
just want to
determined, yeah.
see how that will relate in land space if we did build out for the.
I apologize. I misunderstood the question. So we actually have determined that. The determination that was made was that this is a standalone jail, which will have sheriff's administration. And the reason for that was it was the strong committee view that the courts need to stay downtown. What hasn't been determined yet is whether and I'm going to talk about this in just a minute, whether the current Justice Center is renovated or whether it's a build new, lower rise, efficient courthouse, but in the downtown area. The determination has been made that it's inefficient and ineffective to rebuild. We knew that we couldn't. The first determination that was made was that we cannot save the current jails. It's just impossible to use the current jails. Then we knew that we have to so we couldn't renovate, so we knew that we have to rebuild the jails. Then the question was, do we have a connected jail courthouse, and if so, where, or do we separate them? The problem in the second point was nobody was willing to take the courthouse out of the downtown core. So it meant that if they were connected, it would have to be basically downtown. And there were huge issues with trying to rebuild a jail downtown, especially since the idea is to have a low-rise, campus jail. So the decision ultimately was we're going to build the jails outside of the core downtown area, close but outside, have transportation, and have the courts still downtown. So that's where we are in that determination. So no, the courts will not be part of of the jail.
Yeah, and that was through the committee, Ms. Conwell. And
There's a ton of study done on that
determined a
also.
while back. Ms. Simon.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I have a few comments, then a question. I first want to address the questions that come before this committee, talk about and address mass incarceration over the jails in the 1970s and 90s, quadrupled, and, it's not safer. But I think it's really important to understand that those are federal jails that were imposed with federal sentencing guidelines, which mandated extraordinarily long and just arduous, inequitable sentencing. That is what happened during that time. It took discretion away from the judges. They had none. It resulted in a whole generation of people being set back in equitable application to the next generation. But this council and this county is not in a position to have any control over the discretion of our local county judges. These are apples and oranges. So I think it's really vital, this committee understands that our role as a separate branch of government from the courts, our job and our jurisdiction is over those measures that we can take to reduce pretrial occupants of the jail, which we're doing. But we cannot, under any circumstance, intervene on any individual judge who's elected in this county to decide who's going to be in our custody and who's not. And that can't be lost on the committee. We don't have that power or jurisdiction to go over to the courts and say, we want this person out, we want that person out. That person shouldn't be here. Is this person in for murder? Is this person not in for murder? It's nice to oversee, but we don't have that jurisdiction. And the lesson is when we had sentencing guidelines that created a terrible mess when we took discretion away from the judges. Our job, our role, our budget has to do with what we can do. Our jail's different, by the way. This isn't a prison. Nobody's in here for life. Nobody's in here for capital punishment, thank goodness. We're in here, they're in there waiting sentencing. That's what they're in for. This is designed and will be built for short-term occupation. Hopefully that will continue to be the trend. But this is different from mass incarceration. This is holding cells. And we need to speed that up. And how do we do that? Central booking, diversion, all these things that were presented to us today. Everything in our control is to reduce that time waiting their sentence, but we can't interfere with those sentencing. So I wanted to make that really, really clear. And if we come in and build a jail that's inadequately built, we're going to wind up where we are or were with the zoning, with not enough space, and all of those repercussions that we witnessed with deaths in the jail, which in great part had to do with how the jail was built, but because there wasn't enough space. And we can all be Pollyannas and hope that if we build something that's smaller, that somehow that there won't be people being sentenced into the jail is unrealistic because we don't control sentencing. This is in the hands of our judges. So we better look wisely going forward to make sure we have this space, the ability to expand that space. And I think it's going to be, I like checkpoint 1. And also I like that whatever is going to be most cost efficient to build out. We've got to do that. If we come in and build something too small, that's going to be, again, we're going to be looking at inhumane conditions, unrealistic viewpoints, and we're going to hurt our residents who have to unfortunately be in the jail. So I don't know how much time you need to get that base point you're looking for, Mr. Applebaum, but we better move forward and understand that the jail's population's not going to go down, that COVID was just an aberration, a glitch on our chart. It will go down with all of the investment we're making in pretrial and central booking, but we don't know when we're going to see the result of that, and we are going to have misdemeanants back in the jail because for a year, in a lot of respects, have been, somewhat of a safety concern to communities that don't have a place to take them. And just because they're low-level felonies or high-level misdemeanors, that doesn't mean it's okay to leave that population on the streets in our communities. We've got to understand they'll be back in the jail, but our job is to make sure we have everything in place to make sure that we can reduce that pretrial population. And I think we're doing that. But the question that I have, thank you, Mr. Chair, is the jail population committee and the jail population manager. Did I understand that manager, the person in charge, will not be our sheriff? I mean, I thought I saw a slide that said it might be the administration.
No, the jail population manager will report to the chief of staff.
Why wouldn't that person report to our sheriff, who under our code is the one who's responsible? So I want to look at that. I don't need an answer. Well, let's get an answer.
Bob Curry wants to comment. This is not my area.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. To the councilwoman, we had good discussions about that. When the position was originally designed, when we got the recommendation from the stakeholder group and the consultants for the position, the jail population manager had two components. One, it was a combination of a data analyst and a jail population manager who would be skilled. Are we allowed to take for long? Who would be skilled in the ability to work with stakeholders, develop policy, to determine what's the makeup of jail population, programs around that, to be able to work with stakeholders to identify individual people in the jail for expedition, maybe for recycling to diversion, et cetera. When the sheriff, Violent, Bill Mason, myself, the chief of staff, looked at the position, the sheriff in particular made the determination that it was actually a description of two real positions, a data analyst and somebody who had criminal justice experience who could be the jail population manager. That data analyst has been separated out, and that data analyst will focus on jail population, demographics, et cetera. He'll work and report directly through into the sheriff's office. And then that person can be leveraged to provide jail diversion data, jail central booking data, jail data as it relates to our stepping up programs and other social services programs, because people are always asking for jail data, demographics, health, mental health, et cetera. So now we come to the jail population manager. It was determined by our group, the sheriff, chief of staff, myself, that it made more sense for the jail population manager not to be, so to speak, owned by any particular department for objectivity and to get buy-in from the stakeholders. So the fear was that if the jail population manager was owned by the sheriff, he might not be considered an honest broker by the courts when the sheriff needs to reduce the jail population. If he was owned by the courts, then the same kind of biases might influence. So we determined that the best placed, most insulated, central location was to put him in public safety. And because it was such an important position, and because the initiative was so important, the chief of staff and others determined that it should have it should be imbued with the sense of importance that it reports directly to the chief of staff, so that everybody understands when the jail population manager is working that he has the authority of the highest offices within the executive branch. So that was the thinking beyond that.
Okay, well, I'd like to review that with the committee going forward, because I think the imbued with the authority comes from ORC, as the sheriff has that authority and jurisdiction above and beyond what any kind of safety commission at the administration has. So public, whatever it is, safety director, I think that position has already been imbued with the power and to handle jail population.
The thinking is, though, that the jail population manager, one of the functions of a jail population manager is to understand and work with pretrial services, let's say at the common police court level. And in order to have that buy-in, it's best that it not be perceived to be an employee of the sheriff department. The jail population manager doesn't have authority over the jail to, make people leave the jail. It doesn't have authority over the common police court to institute bond reform. It just has the ability to say, here's good policy, and to try to get buy-in from the stakeholders based upon best practices. So we were struggling with why would it be a sheriff department employee when all of the policy implications affect public defender, county prosecutor, for things like early intervention programs, diversion under the executive. So it seemed to make most sense not to have that person owned by any of the individual agencies who have an interest in an individual policy. But yeah, of course, we can continue to discuss it. The job has been posted, I think, Wednesday of last week. The interviews, I haven't started to see any resumes come in yet. It doesn't mean that reporting structures can't change.
Okay, thank you. At some point, maybe the chair wants to hear from the sheriff about that.
Actually, I was going to give my standard, boy, if we had an elected sheriff, I know where that position would go.
Mr. Chairman.
But I'll leave that. I do want to thank Ms. Simon for what she said. What she said in a nutshell really is what the committee has been working on. I never would have, short of being on the Just Center Jail Committee, realized the intricacies of a jail, which is why we're also going to go into the courts. There are things that they do that I had no idea, and it's all connective tissue. It's, the wrist bone's connected to the elbow. I mean, it is amazing at the moving parts and how everybody has to be on board. I can report to the committee that the Just Center Committee that I'm on, representing the president, has really worked well together. Every major decision that we've made has been unanimous, which I never would have thought of going in. So when we're talking about new things like this, sure, we can talk about it further. bring the sheriff in with that. But I just wanted to get an overview on the jail, what the function of the jail is that you graciously took us through is important, because most people don't realize we're not holding people there. It really is a detention, not even a detention, it's a holding center, really. And it's for the purposes of the court, which we'll obviously go into next. But there are so many intricate little things on what we can do with this jail, so many interesting, important things that we can do with this jail as far as health services, food services, just on the health services side, what we can provide, that most of these people are the sickest people in Cuyahoga County coming in off the streets with mental problems, social problems, where we'll actually have a chance to address those. And the money that we're going to save with a new jail can easily be put back into programming for these services. Nothing's perfect. Certainly a jail isn't perfect, but we have a good team put together that have built jails and justice centers throughout the United States. Cuyahoga County is not. I think we look at each other as oh, we're special. We are not special. We're no more different than Philadelphia or Lexington, Kentucky. We're no different than San Diego or San Antonio. A jail's a jail, justice is justice. There are intricate little differences, like we'll find between Cuyahoga County, the way we're set up, and Franklin County, the way they're set up, and Hamilton County and how they're set up. And we have an opportunity, probably a little bit too late right now, but an opportunity to look at how justice throughout Ohio is dispensed. And it is different. It's not apples and apples, as they say, which we'll find out. But there are ways that we can trim this and make it better. The committee's working hard on that. I think we have the right people on the committee, and we move forward. And we'll be having more of these meetings like today with Mr. Applebaum and his team, whoever he determines to bring in, to bring us all up to speed. So when decisions come before us, we're 100% ready to go. Okay?
Mr. Chairman? Yes, sir. I have a follow-up question for Mr. Applebaum, if I may. When you talked about the pods of 48, am I correct in presuming this is their standard operating and not double bunked, and so that when you said that the base case you're working with could handle 1680, that sounds like 34, I believe it is 34 or 35 of 48. Is that what you're working with?
You have to get into the details because there's some special populations. So, one of the things we talk about, we keep thinking as though this is just, generic people in the jail. Well, you also have to break down special populations. Male, female, certain medical condition, SMI. And so within the jail itself, there's also units and pods that are broken down to take care of these special populations. And some of those have specialty beds. So you got to break it down more than that. I haven't done it yet for you. I mean, our program does. What I'm saying, though, is that when it comes to the general flow of how you increase or decrease, generally it's in 48 pods. But actually, there's finer breakdowns within the program.
And my question was, when you talk about pods of 48, you're talking about their normal capacity, not, you were saying like this one base case could go up to 1,800 with double bunking and such things.
Well,
you're not talking about that with the 48. The
No,
48 is the standard way it would operate. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. That's right. There's some double bunking involved in the program, but it depends on the population, and there's a certain number and we're still working through this, by the way, programmatically, to what fits the best to meet expansion. But the idea is not to go back to some of the practices that we have right now that are so difficult to work with.
Okay. And Mr. Chairman, I just got to respond and say that I have a problem with my vision for a safer community with less incarceration being dismissed and labeled as Pollyannish. It's not like the criminal justice system is great and that it's been working wonderfully. And it's not like we're trying to do something that hasn't been done elsewhere. There's other communities that have been reducing their jail populations for years, and that they have hundreds of empty cells because they built jails too big. And no, it's obvious. It's not in our authority to tell somebody that they have to be released from the jail. But I hope we're not all operating in silos anymore. We all have to work together, and it's about creating a consciousness that it's important that we do better and we can do better. And I think that's what the Jail Population Management Committee is all about. And Mr. Chairman, to my colleague, Ms. Simon, for years, you have been pursuing a vision about improving the environment and about changing our consciousness about how we deal with plastics and other such things, a vision and a passion that I greatly respect. I'm just trying to do the same thing with criminal justice and to help create a mindset that the way we've been doing things before is not the way we have to keep doing them, and that it can be better and it can be successful. And I think we have, as Mr. Applebaum said, we have 6 months to a year to work with, and that any progress that we can make will be hugely beneficial, and that we should all collectively put our minds and hearts to it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And to further that, and I really appreciate what Ms. Simon said, because it really brought everything home, especially for me. We're all lay people. She's not. And what I like to do is leave important decisions such as this and the driving of the bus in the hands of those that do it for a living, and especially those that not only do it for a living, that we have hired to guide us. And that would be Mr. Applebaum and his group. Mr. Applebaum, if you would also please, when you get a chance, send the backgrounds and resumes of your team to all the council so we know who we're dealing with. We're dealing with some of the best that are out there that are building the newest of the new of justice facilities with also jails. So there's going to come a point where we're not going to agree on some things, but I like to say, even when it comes to the courts or the jails, it's not what you want, it's what you need. And we're here to provide the need, not the want. And if we don't lose sight of that, we're going to be fine.
I will say that, the massive amount of expertise we brought in on the programming team and now the expertise we have on the criteria team represents some of the finest expertise in the country. A lot of opinions, not always in complete agreement. But the bottom line is, I'm just going to say this, from my position, mindful of everything that Councilman Miller has said, and we're going to drive and drive and drive, do everything we can do to drive the jail population down, but mindful of what Ms. Simon has said, we're not going to build a jail that's going to be too small on day one, because we can't afford to do that, and that would be a mistake too. So, we have these competing ideas, and we have to thread the needle here as best we can to save taxpayers money and to have the best system here. And I will make one comment to you. I thought doing a convention center and a convention center hotel was difficult. The level of difficulty of doing the in this community, figuring out what to do with a jail and a courthouse is another notch up in the level of difficulty, and it's what you guys deal with every day. So it's tough stuff, but, you know, we just have to keep talking and working through it. That's all we can do. So with that in mind, let's go from the frying pan into the fire and talk about the courts for a few minutes. We are going to return to the courts discussion in November. Now, so everybody knows, up until April of this year, we were doing the courts and the jails in parallel. So we were meeting constantly on what to do with the courts. We were programming the courts. We were programming the jails. In April, a decision was made to proceed with the jail and to at least temporarily postpone moving forward on the courts to let the jails keep moving. And there's some issues and big discussion on the courts that are, I mean, these are big issues. Now, if you may recall, I think it was in June when I first had a long address here and talked about the whole methodology. So this is just a quick review of a couple things we talked about. So in planning the courts, when I'm talking about the courts, I'm really talking about all the functions in the Justice Center that are not the jails and the sheriff. So it's not only the courts, but it's everyone else who's supported in the Justice Center, who works in the Justice Center or is related to the Justice Center. And keep in mind that we're not just talking about the courts in the Justice Center. We're also talking about the Domestic Relations Court, which probably has the worst situation of all the courts right now and has the greatest need to have a better home. So as I mentioned to you at that time, you know, in order to program the courts, we had to look at all the current requirements. And then we also had to talk about future trends. And when we had our courts planners in, what do they typically look at for future trends? Well, number one, they typically look at the population trend. Is the population going up? Are we growing dramatically? Are we stable? Are we going down? They typically look at court filings. And I actually, what you see there are just the, if you went to the steering committee meeting of 8/7/19, in those pages, you'll see the history of where we are in court filings, which are basically been down over time. Court filings have gone down. You look at the number of judicial officers to be served and who you predict will be served. Now, on this one, this is an issue that we don't consider in our evaluation because the number of judges is constrained by state law. We are agnostic in terms of the number of judges, and the only assumption we make is that the number of judges is what it is and will remain. You know, that's a decision based on the legislature upon the recommendation of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. The other thing that we also have to consider is the constraint imposed by the Supreme Court's rules of superintendents. We suspect that we could probably get variances with good cause shown, but right now, what do those rules of superintendents say? They say some things that are very specific. They say that every trial judge should have a separate courtroom, and they say that every courtroom should have an elevated bench. For example, they say that every courtroom should be equipped with a jury box. So every courtroom has to be jury-enabled under the rules of superintendents, and because we don't have a civil or criminal division, every judge, every common pleas court judge at least, handles both civil and criminal cases. So it not only has to be enabled for a jury, but it has to be enabled to handle a criminal jury trial, you know, with all the issues of security, prisoner movement, et cetera. So these are some of the constraints that if you don't modify them, that you work with. So right now, this is an interesting graphic. And here's what I'm going to say with this graphic. Right now, if you look at the existing square footage, usable, and I'm talking about the usable square footage, I'm not grossing this up. This is the actual space without the back of the house space. Right now, there's 702,000 square feet of space, which is occupied by the court components, which you see on the right. Okay, now, if you simply took the space that is there right now and adjusted it for space needs, and I'll give you an example of this. Right now, our courtrooms are actually undersized in this respect. Courtrooms do not meet ADA. If you were to actually modify the courtroom so it met ADA, it would have to be a bigger courtroom to meet ADA. And if you took every courtroom, everyone has to be jury enabled. If you modified its size, if you took care of what really should be done with respect to the lack of proper space in the domestic relations court and how magistrates operate. So if you just took what we have right now before you consolidated, before you did things differently, and if you just basically modified that to existing standards, you would actually have to expand that 702 to 948,000. And then you have to account for some modification over time. So projected, it's about the same 953,000. If you took that 953,000 square foot, and by the way, in the program, you'll see on the right all the different occupants of what's in the court right now and where some of that square footage was in the original program. Now, of course, you have to gross that up because that, that's the usable square footage. You have all the support in the back of the house, and there's a grossing factor for court functions and a grossing factor for not court functions, but that's actually going to get you up to 1,240,000 square feet if you didn't do something different. If you took 1,240,000 square feet, and if you either attempted to renovate the building, first of all, you cannot renovate the Justice Center to get that. You would actually have to renovate it and have an addition. If you build new to that entire square footage, you have a very, very large and very expensive facility. What are the drivers right now? Well, one driver is simply courtroom standards. Those courtrooms are deficient right now in terms of courtroom standards. Providing litigation space for magistrates, particularly in the domestic relations court, they don't even have a litigation space. And these are some miscellaneous factors. Dangerous archival storage for the clerk of court. Go down and take a look at how the clerk of court's files are stored. And then you'll know what I'm talking about. Office crowding, prosecutor and public defender. Significant operational shortfalls for the Court of Common Pleas and domestic relations court. And then just the failure, the ADA issues, which are pretty profound in the courts. So those are the factors that are pushing out and determining what these space needs may be. So in November, and I'm not going to get into the details right now, but here's what's going to happen when we meet again in November. First of all, we're going to talk about what it would cost to actually renovate or build to the current needed program. And the numbers are going to be shared in November. I'm not going to get ahead of myself now because I'm going to present them to the steering committee first. I'm going to tell you this. First of all, renovation would be far costlier than building new. And many of the programmatic objectives would still be unsatisfied with renovation. Just imagine what you actually have to do to take an existing courtroom on a floor and make it ADA compliant. It's tremendously difficult, not to mention the fact it would take years to be accomplished because you can only do so much at a time and you have to displace the judges, not to mention the fact it would be very disruptive. It's a very difficult process. Now, we could do Band-Aid fixes. I mean, we could, continue to patch and repair and, fix systems as they break, and eventually the whole building, will outlive its useful life. But the true renovation, much more expensive to renovate than to build. Now I'm going to tell you also, either approach to build out to that full program, either approach is going to likely be viewed as cost prohibitive by you, by the county administrator, by taxpayers. Very expensive to build that whole program, very expensive, unless we maximize opportunities to consolidate and improve efficiencies and do some things that are not going to be comfortable for everybody involved, but are very commonly done in other jurisdictions who face the same problem. So what are we talking about? We'll be talking about opportunities for consolidation and improved efficiency to achieve construction and operational savings, Many of these things don't require any modification to the rules of superintendents. Examples would be modifying space standards, eliminating some programs, moving major office functions either off-site or to an adjacent office structure. Keep in mind, and here's something to think about, when you have a courthouse building, any office that is on the same floor of a courthouse, courthouses have extremely high ceilings, much more expensive space to heat, to ventilate, to build. Well, office buildings, office functions exist in buildings which are with less of a cost to build out, lower ceilings, easier to heat and ventilate. They don't have the grandeur of courtrooms, but they still can be, like this building, very nice. So the question is, can you take some of those functions and offices out of a courthouse structure and either do it off-site, or even if you did a side-by-side building, many jurisdictions have your courthouse with all your core administrative function in an office building next door, built at a much lesser cost. Some will object to that, saying I want all my staff right there with me, but it's a discussion that we have to have. And then there's the issue of shared facilities. There's a big discussion about what facilities are people willing to share. Beyond that, with a reasonable request for a variance, and this is a sore subject with some, but do we have to consider modifying the courtroom mix? Right now, every judge is entitled to a jury-enabled courtroom, but other jurisdictions have noted that they do have a courtroom mix. You could have a pot of 4 judges, each one gets a courtroom, but maybe there's one jury-enabled room, a couple less expensive hearing rooms or other rooms that they share in the pod, and they schedule their jury trials. I'm not saying that that's going to be an acceptable solution, but my job is to present every solution and then be told what to do with that solution. But we have to present all these ideas, and we'll see where they go. Because I will tell you right now that if we don't do something, if we just simply did sort of the wish list and take everything we have right now and build it out to standards, it's going to be an extremely expensive proposition and probably one that you will not have an appetite for.
Court or the appeals court on there?
Not yet.
Okay, so that'd be even more.
Yes, but on the other hand, the opportunity would be, there could be an opportunity because right now we operate the old county courthouse. And if you could consolidate your functions, there may be opportunities. And by the way, if the domestic relations court does move out and is in a new facility, in a new campus facility, now, now you have less county operations in the old courthouse. You may have opportunities to do different kinds of uses there, but you have to think about what remains there and what doesn't remain there. That's all part of a conversation. And I don't want to get into detail because we've gone down the path of doing these studies. A lot of this has been studied, and we're going to start up again in November, but I just wanted to give you a preview of what will be discussed at that time. So the jail's a difficult topic. The court's also a difficult topic. Unfortunately, this council is presented with these buildings years and years and years after maybe this should have been dealt with, but it's the problem we have now that we have to solve.
I have a question.
It just seems to me that, and I look forward to getting into that, but the particulars that we deal with are very challenging. And then you're dealing with personalities. In your report and discussions in November, are you going to deal with the actual judicial seats in each individual court and the personnel back? Is that what you call back of house?
Well, here's what you do from a planning point of view. We know that for every judicial officer, we know how, every judicial officer has a court set. Every judicial officer has so many FTEs that are associated with that judicial officer, and there's so much back of the house. So for every judicial officer, we understand exactly how much cost and expense there is both to build and to operate. So we know by judicial officer what the cost and expense is. You'll never have me talk about the issue of the number of judicial officers. That's not part of my mission here. That's someone else's decision, but we will talk about, the cost and expense of a courthouse as a function of how many judicial officers there are, and therefore how much staff and support they have to have.
And that's where, when it gets to us and Mr. Miller's committee, is cost and expense per seat. And as the world knows, nobody wants to talk about it, but we're heavy on seats in Cuyahoga County as opposed to any other county in Ohio. When it comes down to the bottom line, how much this is going to cost, again, I'm going to not what you want, I'm going to go to what you need. And you outline the process and who makes the decision on the seats up here, and that's the legislature with recommendations from the Supreme Court?
Recommendation from the Chief Justice.
Okay. Well, I mean, if they say you got what you got, then we're stuck with that and we're going to have to move forward. I find it hard to believe that what we have is what we're stuck with. So we're going to have to get a determination from the Supreme Court and find out where that's at. And I know back when Justice Moyer was alive, he had worked on this. The plan was in place. He unfortunately passed away. The present Chief Justice was a red hot potato for her, so she just threw it back on the shelf. So we're walking into another new Chief Justice, so hopefully we'll have a visionary in that seat soon. Questions from the committee? Yes, ma'am.
Just a comment, or when I hear from the consultant, Mr. Applebaum, thank you, that there's a concern about taxpayers, they're going to push back, and everybody's going to push back at the cost. I think it's our job sitting here to examine every option and not for this to be fed to us with a lens from the consultant. It needs to be looked at from us as the decision makers to look at and analyze the pros and cons of every option. So I don't want to sit here and only hear one version because somebody's telling you, or, I want to see what this will cost in real life numbers, and then we as a body can determine whether that makes sense or not. And I would appreciate that viewpoint.
Let me just respond to that. I didn't mean to, what I meant to say to you on this, I'm not just going to give you an option that says, here's the wish list, and it's going to cost you $1 billion, and you have no other choices. My point was the reverse. We're going to present to you options. We're not making any determinations, but we're going to present you options so that you can see what could happen with different decisions being made at different price points. We will exercise no judgment at all as to what you should do or what you should spend. We will give you the options of what you can do and what it will cost and what you will get. So I didn't mean to imply that we're going to use our judgment as to what we're just saying that we have to put different options to you because just giving you the wish list of everything and telling you the price tag, I don't think that's going to be adequate from what you expect from a consultant.
Okay, I appreciate that. And Mr. Chair, this will all go before your commission, the steering committee, right? The court as well as the jail?
Every major decision is going to be filtered through the county council.
But it will go through that steering committee that's overseeing the
Most
jail
likely will come through here.
first?
Yes, and mostly a committee of the whole.
Why would we skip the steering committee if it's overseeing the jail of the collaborative body that's been put
Maybe
together?
I didn't understand your question.
Yeah, this will go, the steering committee now that is overseeing the jail project
Yes.
that will also be involved with the court.
The whole thing.
Yes, that's
The whole-
all.
Eventually. What I wanted to do ideally, and I thought I had an understanding, was that we were going to focus on the jail. We weren't going to talk about the Justice Center, knowing full well the Justice Center was an issue, but the jail is more of an issue right now. I wanted to get going. I didn't want to lose focus on the jail. It became apparent that some of the judges were a little concerned that we weren't thinking of them, maybe leaving them behind. Didn't want that to happen. Therefore, we're having this discussion. We'll have broader discussions. And I anticipate as once the jail is in our rearview mirror and the Justice Center is in front of us, that we'll be having many, many more discussions like this.
I would only add, Mr. Chair, that we're looking at comprehensive financing of, huge projects in the county with regard to the Progressive Field, right? Is that what it's called, the Indians, or Guardians? And we're looking at a major construction of a jail, and we know we're looking at a construction, most likely, of a new court. And I'm not sure we can delay this examination. So I appreciate you talking about this today, but I don't think we can separate that out. If we're looking at potential, continuation of the sales tax, it all has to be in the lens of what do we anticipate having to build in major construction. So I think we need to continue to talk about the court in a real way. And I'm glad we've got to move with the jail, but we also have to move with this court. And I see it as in parallel, just because we're talking money right now.
We're there, which is why Mr. Applebaum's addressing it today. So I'm thinking you're going to be hearing much more regarding the movement on the Justice Center. He'll be meeting early November, I guess it is.
We're picking the date to bring back our consultants in November. We don't have the date picked yet, but we're trying to work through the date right now in November.
If you would share that information with the president and the vice president
We
in this
will.
committee, when you share it with the Justice Center Jail Committee, so we can review.
As soon as we know a date, you'll know the date. And we also have to schedule some working group meetings, and we'll probably have a working group meeting with some combination or separately or combined with both the administration and council here even ahead of time, so you'll know, as we've done in the past. And it'll be up to you who you want to invite, but we'll have a preview of what will be presented to get your input and to get your thought process ahead of time.
And to the committee and Ms. Simon, if earlier on, I think we touched on the Justice Center Jail, and what Mr. Applebaum's saying is true. The cost depending on what we do with the Justice Center, new or refurbished, the costs are astronomical. And there are ways to bring that down, is what he's diplomatically saying. And I think it falls to us to be the determining factor, along with the executive, exactly what we are going to provide as needed, not wanted, by the individuals that dispense justice in Cuyahoga County. And again, if we keep that focus, I think we're going to go in the right direction. Are questions for Mr.
Yeah,
Applebaum?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I don't know if this is the appropriate meeting to do this, but are we going to have a meeting on how this is going to be financed?
I anticipate the administration leading that charge. I would have hoped, and I did talk to Mr. Budish about this about a year and a half ago, and he finally came out with the Indians deal, and now he's talking about the 0.25% extension for the jail. I assume that rolls into a Justice Center, but we don't know yet. So I wait along with you, waiting for that determination as we move forward. I would hope in the very near future, and by the very near future, I hope within a month or two, we'll have a clear understanding of all finances as far as the Justice Center, jail, and the Indians deal completed.
Okay, I appreciate that. And to Mr. Applebaum, so you presented the three scenarios based on population potential. Do you have specific costs associated with each of those at this point?
For the courts?
Yes, for the jail. You presented the low tier, the medium tier, and the upper tier.
So let me explain where we are. When we did the original program and got done with the program, we did extensive pricing on that. And that's how we basically got to an all-in, you've heard this all-in budget number of $525 to $550, because that's not only the cost of that jail, sheriff's administration, parking, and land. Now, that number, though, is associated with basically that program that was about 1680 expandable maybe with double bunking up into the 1800s. At this point in time, we just got through the program reconfirmation, and now what's going to happen is we are going through a bit of reprogramming and some initial design to try to gain efficiencies to bring that number down, because now we're combining the sheriff's administration. But those target numbers were just given to the design team. What we've said is, in your next phase of design in the next several months, we're going to continue on with the design, but what we want to know at those target points, because we're not going to know the ultimate number, the population number, but we at least want pretty clear cost estimates at those target points. I don't know what they are yet.
And when do you anticipate that'll happen? You might have said this, but when do you anticipate having those figures?
Well, I would say that right now, and a little bit of this, I will say, it's a little dependent on what assumptions we're making about the site. Because the site does modify a little bit on the program, but basically, we will have cost estimates at the end of schematic design, which I would say is probably another month of program confirmation and 3 months of schematic design. So I'd say in about 4 months.
All right, thank you.
I mean, we'll be developing estimates, and but to really come back with a good number is probably 4 months from now.
Okay, and to hitchhike off with what my colleague Councilwoman Simon said is, if you could present the different scenarios based on the different population models, I'd appreciate that.
We will.
All right, thank you.
Anything further? Thank you very much. We will be seeing you again.
Thank you, and I look forward to being back here again with answers. As we
Appreciate the
move
update.
process.
Sheriff, do you have anything for us? Not today. Thanks for being here. Questions for the sheriff, anyone? Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
I would like the record to reflect that council members Baker and Simon are also in attendance at this meeting.
Thank you very much for being here. Miscellaneous business? We're adjourned.